So a third Project Cars game. It was bound to come out sooner or later, but I don't think many people expected it to be like this. By the thumbnail and title, you can probably already tell I'm not a huge fan of what I've seen so far from this game, so let's begin by answering just why that is. Let's start with the obvious. It looks incredibly arcadey, which would be fine, but when the whole foundation of the series is based upon sim racing, things start to fall apart. I would have been much happier if this game was a spin-off of the Project Cars series, not a direct sequel to Project Cars 2, because they couldn't look more different. This game is probably gonna be incredibly subjective. If you like more arcadey games like Grid or Forza, then I'm sure this game will be for you. But if you're into simulators like Assetto Corsa, R-Factor or the original two Project Cars games, I wouldn't get your hopes up. I have a soft spot for Project Cars 2. It was my first ever racing sim and I love it a lot for that, but at the same time I can acknowledge a lot of its problems. Project Cars 2 was so inconsistent. Some cars handled perfectly, whereas some other cars were almost undrivable. The same could be said about the tracks. Some tracks were flawlessly laser scanned to perfection, and some tracks just looked like a poorly made mod. But ultimately, with the right cars and the right tracks, there was a lot of fun to be had for a great sim racing experience. This is why I'm annoyed that Project Cars 3 is a direct sequel and not a spin-off or a completely new franchise entirely, because in comparison to Project Cars 2, it looks so arcadey it hurts. So let's start examining the trailer and pick out any potential problems. So let's start on a positive note. The graphics look fantastic, and that's to be expected. The first two games look pretty good as well. Anyway, just by this opening scene with this AMG GTR, I could be fooled into thinking that it was a Forza Horizon game, not a Project Cars game. Obviously, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when the whole foundation of the series is based around sim racing, it doesn't give the best first impression. We then see the first instance of car upgrades, and I'm not a fan of this for obvious reasons. It just reinforces the arcadey element that will either be loved or hated by many, and I still just can't understand why this had to be a Project Cars game, not a completely new franchise. Anyway, we then see what appears to be a GT3 and GT4 race at Interlagos, which for the most part I don't have any problem with. But that will soon change as we look at the actual gameplay, and this is where I really start to get annoyed by this game. So here we are. This video is gameplay by Game Riot, and I'll leave the original video in the description below. Right off the bat, you can instantly tell it looks so arcadey. Everything from the track to the music, and even stuff like the font and the radio icon. We also see these perfect corner notifications, which in my opinion look a bit odd and out of place. I don't know what was wrong with having a virtual racing line like in most other games. This street track is obviously not a real circuit, at least I hope so, because it looks too unrealistic and does not belong in a Project Cars game. It looks really similar to a track from Grid, which again wouldn't be a problem, but the Grid franchise has always been an arcadey series. Meanwhile, you've got Project Cars going from a simulator to arcade, and it's just so incredibly jarring to see how different the games appear to be. Let me skip ahead to a race at Interlagos shown later in the video. Interlagos seems to be this game's new key addition. It's the only real life track seen so far, and I could be wrong, but the logo of the game appears to be the Senna S at Interlagos. Anyway, there's nothing special I noticed during this segment, apart from one thing that really scares me. It's on screen now, and I'll give you a second to see if you can find what I'm talking about. The Interlagos pit lane is completely closed, and the street track shown earlier doesn't have a pit lane at all. Does this mean you won't be able to pit during a race? Because it completely disregards any element of strategy the game could have had. I don't know if it's just me who feels this way, but not being able to do one of the most fundamental parts of racing is just awful in my opinion. So to conclude, I think this game is simply a cash grab from Codemasters. I've been saying throughout this video that this game should be part of a completely different franchise, not part of Project Cars. But Codemasters have just decided to rush out a game under the Project Cars title to make some more money from people expecting a game like Project Cars 1 or 2. And it makes me sad that I don't like this game just because of how much I like Project Cars 2. To summarise, Project Cars 2 looks like a great arcade racing game, but an absolutely awful Project Cars game. Anyway guys, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you all next week for another video.